Hey guys, I'm Snorlax. You also know me as Tommy, and welcome to the first ever episode of Signal with Snorlax, where we try to do exactly what the title states, right? We try to find some signal from markets and crypto, specifically, try to find some signal throughout the noise. Let's be honest, markets can be very difficult to decipher at times, difficult to predict. But hopefully today's episode can maybe provide you with some insight as far as where the market's next major move could be occurring. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you guys today about Solana. If you've been watching Market Check, if you're in our Discord, you know that I have been talking about this quite a bit recently. How Solana is effectively telegraphing a massive move is coming for the crypto markets. Now, I know it's the summer. And I know that the expectation generally for summer price action is to expect chop. But I really think that Solana specifically is communicating to us that crypto is on the precipice of a massive trending move. Now, we're not quite sure whether that's up or down, but hopefully today's video can provide you guys with some signal to be able to figure that out, or at least make some educated guesses as far as what direction that could be for the market. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I know it's the summer, so everybody is generally expecting a crab market, a choppy market. But I will say, and I said this to our Discord yesterday, you know, I remember people saying the exact same thing in 2023 and 2024, and we ended up getting some very aggressive trending moves towards the end of those summers. I can't imagine that this time is going to be any different. So without further ado, let's talk about what I mean when I say that. And I feel like we should start with the Sol USD chart itself, because, you know, we might as well set the tone for the episode. But right, I mean, we look at Solana, and I think, you know, Tucker did a great video yesterday talking about volume profiles, kind of how they function, and then outlining where majors are more or less residing within those volume profiles. And I think Solana is a great example of this, really. And I'm just going to start by, you know, drawing a basic volume profile myself. As you guys can see, volume profiles are very rotational in nature. Solana is a perfect representation of this. Range highs, range lows, range highs, range lows. I mean, we saw deviation both sides of the range. Now we're kind of waiting to see, okay, what is Solana going to do here? Is this potentially a very long-winded reaccumulation occurring? Is it possibly distribution? Maybe this chart's just set to go sideways forever. I'm sure some people are asking themselves. But rest assured, guys, I do think that we are about to see a big trending move on Sol USD. And I think that's largely based on the Solana pairs, Solana Bitcoin, Solana ETH. I will talk about those later on this episode. If you watch Market Check, you might think I already talk about them ad nauseum, but hopefully I can provide some visual clarity here as far as my thoughts and the way that I'm viewing, you know, where Sol BTC and Sol ETH fit into the broader picture, right? So we look at Sol. I've already said it's rotational. It's in a range, but a lot has happened in this range for Sol. It hasn't just been, you know, range highs, range lows. We've seen people make generational wealth on Solana, the chain. We've seen people lose generational wealth to meme coins. We've seen lots of crime occur. So I think the context now, obviously, versus kind of the first few months that we were within this range is entirely different in that sense, right? Is the cleanse complete from this crime cycle that we've seen for Solana, or is it time to potentially atone some more? You know, in the same way, when we look at this market structure here, it's very clearly one of two things to me, which I guess isn't quite so clear. But right, I mean, this is either potentially a macro complacency shoulder, or potentially a lower or a higher low, rather, before we look for higher pricing. So I think this is probably a good spot for me to move over to Sol BTC, Sol ETH, because it is really guiding my thoughts quite strongly right now. And if you've been watching Market Check, if you follow me on X, by the way, like and subscribe the video if you're enjoying the content. But if you follow me on X, you watch Market Check, you know how much I talk about these pairs. Why am I talking about these pairs as much as I am? And I mean, it's really pretty simple. While Sol USD might be indecisive, Sol BTC and Sol ETH both look set for lower pricing at this point, right? And I think Sol BTC is probably the quintessential example of this, really kind of consolidating around this swing low, but momentum, when we look at RSI, has continued to trend down basically since these first highs on Sol BTC. And as we kind of, in hindsight, it looks like we have distributed up here on Sol BTC. And in hindsight, I remember I had a friend talk to me, and I think sometimes markets are as simple as just thinking about it, right? How much more mind share could Sol possibly take against Bitcoin than having the president of the United States, talk about and launch a meme coin on chain? So I think given that context, we're probably not just post distribution on Sol BTC. We're actively in a downtrend on this pair. The question is, okay, where do you think it comes down into? I will say I'm not in the camp that we're just seeing this replicate ETH BTC from the last cycle. I do think it'll be a bit different, a bit more nuanced. I think meme coin speculation and gambling on chain will probably age better than DeFi did, because I think the ultimate unwind was probably not as bad as the ETH DeFi one was in 2022. I'm kind of looking for this level to get hit on Sol BTC though at some point in the next probably 3 to 6 months. It could be sooner than that. I'd probably lean that it's going to be sooner than that. But we know markets tend to take much longer than you or I would prefer. But yeah, I'm expecting Sol BTC to come down into this level. It looks to me like this gap is going to get filled. We're post distribution, like I said. When we kind of take into account basically the full cycle profile here of Solana, sure, you could get maybe one more spike up here over the coming weeks, but this looks much more likely to continue lower. Momentum pointing down, moving averages pointing down. Really, I think context pointing down for this pair. We're probably going to see Sol underperform Bitcoin. I think that's the key point that I want to bring up by mentioning this chart, which brings me to Sol ETH, right? Which is maybe a bit more complicated than Sol BTC, because most alts have underperformed against Bitcoin for the majority of the cycle. So it's easy to say, okay, well, Sol should underperform against Bitcoin now too. But what about, how does ETH fit into the equation as well? Because ETH has been much maligned this cycle as well, and perhaps for good reason. But when I look at this pair as well, this is, I think, maybe a bit confusing for most people to look at, right? Because is this just a continuation of the vertical accumulation that we've seen since effectively December 23rd? Despite the fact that Solana has been ranging, you have been seeing it accrue value against ETH, which I do think is very interesting. But I also think, with that said, we're probably getting close to the end of this trend on Sol ETH. I think it's only natural that we see this pair come down as well, right? Just looking at RSI. I mean, this is, I think, the first visible weakness that we've seen on momentum since this this vertical accumulation, we'll call it, or maybe distribution now, began. So for me, when I look at Sol ETH, if you're going to lose this swing high, which, in a strong trend, you probably shouldn't be retesting this high as many times as Sol ETH has done. This looks set for a rotation back down here. Now, I don't quite know what target to expect. Obviously, I've put some targets out publicly on social media. Things can change. But I feel pretty strongly, actually, that this is set to come down, and that this momentum that we're seeing here on high time frames is probably getting set to head to oversold territory as well. And should we see a move like that, this pair can come down pretty dramatically. So why am I talking so much about Sol BTC and Sol ETH? Because a lot of people aren't even going to bother trading these pairs at all. Here's where I think the important nuance is, right? I am fudding Sol performance, yes. But if Sol BTC and Sol ETH are setting up for 30 to 40% moves lower against other majors, Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are considered to be, and I laugh when I say this because it's on a relative basis, it's not really the case, but they're the least volatile assets in crypto, Bitcoin and Ethereum. So if we're talking about Sol underperforming to such a degree that these pairs put in a move like that, that can only mean one of two things. Either Bitcoin and ETH are about to go up a lot, on a relative basis versus Sol, or Sol is about to tank against Bitcoin and ETH, and also in USD. So that's why when I say Solana is really kind of the key piece to be watching, and we can go back to Sol USD now. I mean, it's really the key piece for what the market is going to do next. Now, we don't know quite what direction that could be. I'm going to go over some contextual clues here that can potentially point us in either direction, but we do know these Sol pairs are pointing towards massive Sol underperformance over the next few months. And if that is going to occur, crypto markets are likely loading a very dramatic trend here into the end of the summer, which is why, you know, if you are still here for the summer, this is exactly why we stick around. But yeah, let's try to make sense of what direction that could be. I already kind of pointed out, okay, we're in a range. Is this a higher low that we're potentially putting in? This was the generational bottom of Sol, and we're potentially going higher. Or, you know, is this potentially complacency of some sort before we come and at least take out that low, probably more realistically into these price targets down in here? I think it's an interesting question. I think there are plenty of evidence realistically pointing towards both directions, but got to continue to lean on the pairs. Let's talk about, I think, some positive implications potentially for Sol first. I think the easiest one for me to point out is Coinbase, which, you know, I've talked about for most of the cycle, has really traded very closely to Solana. It's kind of been like a combination of Solana and Ethereum trading together in a sense. Now, we've seen a really interesting divergence here over the last week between Coin and ETH and Sol. And I think the bull case for those assets right now is that, you know, maybe they are just lagging behind something like Coinbase. We've seen Circle give huge pumps, obviously, throughout this move on Coinbase. They're largely correlated, at least like these moves are correlated to each other. So is Solana potentially just loading in a huge candle to the upside in the same way that Coinbase did? Because, I mean, we saw the same thing happen in Q4 of last year. Coinbase moved before ETH, before Sol. They eventually caught up. Obviously had huge catch-up trades in the weeks that followed. So are we seeing something like that for Sol, right? A higher low here. And now I'm not saying I think that Sol's about to rip back to the highs in the bullish scenario, because I think that might be a little far-fetched for me to believe. But I think in this scenario, we're talking about probably ETH closer to replicating what Coin is doing right now, and Sol probably underperforming to the upside, but still going higher, right? Maybe on-chain comes back to life if that's the case. But I think that's probably the most bullish you know, reasoning that I can give for Solana right now, as well as the fact that you have Bitcoin itself teetering on price discovery. Once again, you're eating up war FUD. Could we keep chopping around the highs? For sure. But Bitcoin has been noticeably strong. Bitcoin looks like it could continue trending higher along with equities, which shouldn't be a surprise because Bitcoin is going to have institutional flows largely correlated to equities. You know, I think the other potentially bullish, you know, catalyst for Solana, there really aren't that many coins on chain for Sol right now that look great. This is one of them. You could probably find some other lower caps that are in there as well, but you know, it only takes one runner. And I have been watching this coin. No, I do not own any, full disclosure. But when we're talking about assets that are outperforming on Solana, you got to pay attention. And then we also can look at assets, I think, that used to be on Solana and how they're performing as well. But I think Fartcoin is another asset that I guess it's kind of on the fence, right? Does this coin look good? Does it look bad? In the same way that we're viewing Solana right now, okay, we're kind of ranging up here. Is this like a bull flag of some sort, or is this distribution potentially forming on a complacency shoulder? This is, I think, exactly like the Solana chart in a sense, but which we can talk about now. You know, some reasons why this range could potentially break to the downside. I think the easiest things for me to point to is, well, for one, if Sol BTC made its huge run up through Sol USD price appreciation, then in theory, Sol BTC breaking down would probably mean that Sol USD would go lower. And I think in addition to that, when we look at Sol memes from 2024, I guess some even from 2023. Like, let's call it what it is, guys. It's a graveyard. A lot of these coins don't look good. And even if Sol is to go higher, what is the marginal upside on these assets? I think that's a huge question mark. Who is the marginal buyer for these large cap Sol meme coins? Is that why maybe we've gravitated further down the risk curve? I think on every Solana pump as far as on-chain memes. Right now it's useless coin. Before that, it was launch coin, which I think went to about 350 million, 400 million market cap almost. But even this, right? I mean, it was pumping a few weeks ago. Kind of looks like this has entered that perpetual downtrend that we often see from Sol meme coins. So I think when we look at the way that certain, or really a lot of these Sol meme coins are performing, there is some, I think, signal potentially pointing towards, okay, this range might break to the downside. But yeah, I think you have kind of conflicting information back and forth between proxies that represent crypto and Solana itself. Sol ecosystem is very much kind of a market of haves and have-nots on a consistent basis. And then I think the ultimate wild card in all of this is what sort of implications does Pump Fund have for Solana going forward, right? How does that affect Sol meme coins that are already on chain, that are already bleeding? How does that affect network activity going forward? And how does that impact the relative valuation of Pump Fund and Solana? Because if you were to take Pump Fund out of Sol, how would that reframe your opinion of how it should be valued? And then, if Pump Fund didn't have the whole Solana logo, I guess branding, how would that impact your opinion on how to value a company like that? So there are I think some wild cards in there as well. Sol ETF. We'll see kind of how it all transpires here over the next few weeks. But what I can tell you, in a market that has a lot of noise, a lot of different things going on, I said this to our Discord yesterday, you'd be best to stick to what you think you know the best. And right now, I feel very strongly that we are gearing up for some very large moves on Sol BTC and Sol ETH. And for that reason, I know when these moves finally take place, when these breakdowns on these Sol pairs occur, we're going to see a big move from not just Sol USD, but probably the entirety of the crypto market. So for that reason, I'm focused on Solana. I'm focused on Solana pairs. I hope that today's episode provided you guys with some signal. That was the goal, but I do think that you'll probably get the most signal out of Solana here over the next few weeks. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to Signal with Snorlax. I'm looking forward to doing these more in the future, and hopefully I can continue to provide you with exactly what the title says. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the Because Bitcoin channel so we can continue to put out content like this. But thanks again, guys. Have a great rest of your day, as always, and I appreciate you for tuning in.